Hello everyone, it's Anthony Chadwick from the Webinar Vet, welcoming you to another one of our Lunch and Learn webinars with the Royal College. We're going to be talking today about resolving client complaints and disputes with the Veterinary Client Mediation Service. As you know, this was set up in 2004. They trialled this service to help veterinary surgeons and veterinary nurses resolve complaints with animal owners. This was really because there are complaints made against vets and nurses where there is no obvious serious no instance of a professional misconduct. However, the client maybe just wants to see if there's a way of making some sort of redress, and the Royal College before that couldn't really help. So it was set up in 2014 as a trial, but in September of this year, the Royal College Council unanimously voted to extend the Veterinary Client Mediation Service, which is run by Knockhold's Solicitors. We're very fortunate today to have Jenny Jones, who's a partner at Knockhold's Solicitors, and Eleanor Ferguson, who's the RCBS Registrar and Director of Legal Services. So really looking forward to hearing from you both, and I know you're going to also tell us a little bit about yourself anyway. So it's over to Jenny and to Eleanor. Thank you.
I was going to say good morning, but I think we're well into the afternoon now. In the next 40 minutes or so, Jenny and I are here to talk about the VCMS, and I'm going to shorten it because I think me trying to say Veterinary Client Mediation Service every 2 minutes might be a bit much for everybody.
It's a bit of a mouthful, Anna.
So what we're looking to do is to put the VCMS in context, particularly with the RCBS concerns process, a little bit of the background, the how and why we've arrived at where we are, and some of the reasons behind the scheme. Jenny's then going to take everyone through the processes. So it's how it works, the features of the scheme, what it is, and importantly, what it isn't. Jenny's also going to put it into application with a case study, let people see if it goes the full distance for remediation, what happens then, the sorts of things that might come up. And I will pick up at the end, really to look at the impact on the RCBS process, what changes, if anything, have happened arising out of the mediation scheme. So if we can look at, well, why ADR? And Anthony, in your intro, you've touched on it. I've been at the RCVS for over 10 years, and I think in that time I've seen a steady increase in the number of concerns that we've been getting in, and that's pretty much in line with all the other regulators. And probably the same as practices are seeing in terms of client attitudes, client behaviour, much more willing to actually raise issues. And our concerns peaked in about 2016 with about 1,000 a year. And that sounds quite a lot. It's not, particularly in terms of the overall number of practicing vets and practicing nurses, but it's 1,000 individuals, 1,000 people as professionals who've been drawn into the regulatory system. And we're very conscious of all the stresses and strains that puts on people by virtue of the fact that we are the regulator. And as Anthony pointed out, the college here has a duty under the Act, the Veterinary Surgeons Act, to deal with serious professional misconduct. That's the top end stuff, if I can put it that way. The bits where the behaviour falls far short of that expected. So it's not negligence, it's not the kind of consumer type service type disputes that might come into it. It's pretty much the top end. But notwithstanding that, because of the limited options for animal owners in the past, court litigation, for example, is very expensive, likely to be prohibitive, so it's really not an option. Effectively, we got a lot of people coming to the RCVS as the default setting for complaints of whatever nature, and once the concern had hit our desk, we had to deal with it. So effectively, there was nowhere else for them to go, and we had various limited options as to what we could actually do with it. And I think it's noticeable that about 80% of our concerns were closed down at our stage 1 process. So what did that mean? That meant that we had potentially a number of unhappy consumers out there, because there might have been something that had gone wrong, not crossing the threshold for misconduct, and they were feeling they didn't have anywhere else to go. We had potential for professionals to be suffering quite a bit of stress and anxiety and having to deal with the regulator, simply because we are the regulator and we are the ones that hold the licenses to practice, and people have a natural fear of disciplinary and all that entails, no matter how sure people are in their own minds that everything is going to be okay. And also it meant that the RCVS as an organisation was taking way too long with all its, and using up valuable time and resources. So for all of these reasons, that is why we started looking at ADR. And we ran the first trial with the Ombudsman Service in 2014, and it was an adjudication service, which meant effectively there had to be a right and a wrong, almost like the goodies and the baddies. There had to be an outcome in that sense. Also, key feature of that was that the concern had to first have gone through the RCVS complaints process before it could be accessed. And perhaps understandably, I think very understandably from a practice point of view, if something has gone through the RCVS, are you going to sign up for yet another procedure? No, I think is the answer, and that came through in the results. So that there were low levels of participation, and it wasn't really generally well accepted by the public or the profession. So we looked around for an alternative way, and that led us on to Knockhold's solicitors, who were then dealing with an optical services ADR scheme, pretty much in the same territory in terms of interface with a regulatory organisation. And key differences here related to the fact that it's a mediation service. It's not an adjudication service, and Jenny will be talking a bit more about that all the way through. And also, it's different and fundamentally different in the sense that there is direct access to it. So a member of the public or a practice who are accessing the system don't first have to have gone through the RCBS process. So we'll look a little bit about what that has meant in terms of participation a little bit further down the tracks. But taking into account all of these things, and some of the things I'm talking about the impact at the end, and also taking into account the support that was forthcoming for this scheme, and the way we've changed our processes from the VDS, and also support from the consumer representative that was on our advisory panel. This was approved as a feature of our overall concerns process by RCVS Council in September. I think that slide says wrongly October, it really means September. But the scheme, if you like, has been on its permanent footing since then. So what I hope you're seeing in front of you now is the first stages of what the service is all about. It's funded by the RCVS, obviously, but it is independent. So although Jenny and I are here talking today, and we're talking together in the same room, which is lovely, they are miles away from us, and it's independent, and that was one of the key features in the satisfaction surveys and feedbacks that was coming through in terms of fairness and independence. It covers all species. It's telephone-based mediation. It's for individual owners. It's not for commercial organisations to access. And differentiating it from the previous trial that we had, it's mediation and it's without blame. It's finding a solution to a problem. And although we've got very much the word mediation in the headline there, it is so much more about that. One of the things is about diffusing emotion, allowing practices to reach solutions with their own clients. So that's me giving a little bit of the overview, a little bit of the history, why we've got to where we are. And I'd like to hand over now to Jenny, who's going to take you through in a little bit more detail.
Lovely. Thank you, Eleanor. Thanks. The important thing really to appreciate with the veterinary client mediation service is that focus on finding a resolution and bringing a complaint to a conclusion. As an independent mediation service, we're not here to represent either party, but we're here to help really that communication to flow, the understanding of why a complaint has got to this particular point. And often then communication becomes quite difficult between the practice and individual clients. And mediation particularly with the independent nature, allows those issues to be explored. And as Eleanor says, that's incredibly important for both parties. We can liaise with whoever in the practice is dealing with a concern, so that we're able to ensure that when we're looking at complaints, it can be very flexible and agile, because as Eleanor's mentioned, that need to move through and to address the emotion that's there from the client, but also from the practice, and focus on not the goodies and the baddies, as we've mentioned, but looking at how we can move complaints to be, a step forward, looking to the future, rather than focused on what has happened. In doing that, there's a need to liaise with indemnity insurers, and that's incredibly important when we're looking at the range of complaints that come through and are referred to the VCMS. But with a mediation approach, not adjudication, there's an ability to explore in a confidential and a without prejudice setting issues and then real trigger for complaints, which enables us to look then in that sort of safe space to explore, acknowledge the emotions that's involved, look at then focus and some practical suggestions on how things can be moved forward. And as long as we have parties involved who are stepping forward to look and find a resolution, so whoever that may be in the practice, whether that's practice managers, individual vets, veterinary nurses, we're able to liaise with the appropriate person within the practice and the individual owner to get the complaint to a point where, again, we can be on track to find a resolution. And I think that confidential status of mediation is very important, to allow parties to just talk through those issues, and the agility there to flex it and enable us to address from the most serious complaints where there are high levels of emotion, a lot of grief, guilt, embarrassment, anger, perhaps on the part of the client, through to the lower level issues where there may be a breakdown in communication or issues re fees. And I think the ability of mediation to address that puts both parties in a good position to find a resolution. So over the course of the trial, as Ellen has mentioned, we ran from the 1st of October 2016, and we're now seeing around 120 referrals come through to the VCMS each month. As a direct access scheme, we do see clients contact the service at relatively early stages of their complaint, and I think when we look at the figures, 43% may not have even complained to the practice, or certainly haven't completed the practice's own complaints procedure. And what we will do in that scenario is to explore really why they haven't contacted the practice, and then if clearly there's a complaint here that they are looking to pursue, give them some constructive advice. Often at this point, the complainants are incredibly angry. Again, that level of emotion is there. Helping them by giving some constructive advice in terms of being very clear about why they're unhappy and what they're expecting from the practice enables the practice then to receive a complaint at this stage in a form that's easier to address. They can understand and look and see what the expectations are of the client and then move forward. What we can also do within the VCMS is ensure that we explore those expectations with the client. They may well have come through to us with perhaps less than realistic expectations. That's certainly the case, and we can help them to try and justify and explore those, so that when the complaint is received by the practice, again, they're in a really good position to address that. And most practices, we know, do a fantastic job when complaints or concerns are raised with them. They have a real focus and a dedication to address that, deal with the issue, to ensure the client is then satisfied and they can move forward. In situation, we have very few that then can come back to the VCMS once they have been to the practice, but if they do, they have the opportunity to come back into the service and obtain mediation assistance going forward. It's useful when we're thinking about a direct access scheme to also just reflect really on where inquiries come from. And Eleanor's touched on the inquiry levels at the RCVS. And when we look at the really the source of VCMS knowledge when we look at complainants. 44% explain to us that they have been given details of VCMS by the RCBS. And we touched on the triage process, and again the importance for RCVS to be able to direct those consumers to an alternative and a more appropriate forum and a service that can assist. And I think that's incredibly important. Just under half of what we see comes through from the RCVS at this point. Really interesting is also to see that 13% comes through from the RCVS website. So the client initially is minded to contact the RCVS. It may be they feel that's the only point of call, or it may be that actually they don't know where to turn, and so they're contacting and exploring information to then decide how best to progress their complaint. But if then they look at the RCVS website and are directed to the VCMS, again, that provides them with the appropriate pathway, but then means that we're able to direct them to that resource. We have around 43% that then contact us directly, and as Eleanor mentioned, this is a change from the first trial that was conducted, and it means that the VCMS has the opportunity to help clients and practices at a much earlier stage. It's not bringing mediation to the table after there's been an investigation process. We're looking very much at an early stage once the practice has had the opportunity to try and resolve the concern. The complaint remains live and the complainant's still motivated, we can then assist whether they've found us online, where practices have provided information about the service, or sometimes through charities and other support groups. But what will be important over coming months is looking to ensure that within the veterinary profession sector generally, there's an increased awareness of the VCMS so that people can understand where mediation may be the appropriate forum, and again try to direct complainants to that to the service as and when is necessary. Now, looking at the nitty-gritty really of what comes through from through to the VCMS. Unsurprisingly, 66% of the complaints that we received during that initial year related to dogs, 21% cats, and 8% equine. The remainder were small furries, as we call them. Since the 1st of November, we're now accepting complaints involving any species, but we'll continue to monitor that just to be able to share insight there. The nature of complaints that come through to us, we're looking at around 60% where the complainant refers to allegations or concerns about the standard of care, 20% about client service, and then 11% about clinical fees, which I don't think will be a surprise to many of us in day-to-day practice. And looking at those figures, I think it's important, and this recaps on Eleanor's comment regarding the serious professional misconduct aspects of complaints generally, and a very small proportion of issues that are raised do genuinely relate to serious professional misconduct. And as you can see from the slide, that's really that top end of our pyramid. Below that, we then have allegations relating to standard of care, so the negligence aspect, and this traditionally has been obviously the indemnity insurers, and the court route has been the process, or really the only route for complainants at that stage. And below that, and this is the vast majority of client care and communication issues, that complaints really centre around that relationship and I think the trust and confidence, mutual trust and confidence really between client and practice. And what we see, certainly in terms of the escalated complaints that do come through to the VCMS, is the vast majority are in that lower bracket. Often there will be allegations relating to standard of care which come through, and really we can sit between anything below that top end of the pyramid there, see if mediation would be appropriate, and there'll be discussions then with the practice and the client as to whether it's suitable for mediation, really to allow us to address that trust and confidence, perhaps deterioration or slight damage to the relationship there that has meant that it's not been possible to bring the complaint to a resolution. So in terms of the process, it is a telephone mediation service, as I say, so most of the inquiries do come through to us by phone. We also receive inquiries from members of the public online and by email. And what we will do at that stage is just explore whether they fall within the remit of the service, and look to then ensure they've complained to the practice. As I mentioned, they've been given that constructive advice, and then look to say, okay, now can we take this forward through to mediation? The client's asked to sign an agreement to mediate, which gives consent to speak to the practice, but importantly sets the ethos of mediation, reiterates that it's confidential. We're looking to find resolution without blame, so there won't be an adjudication of who's right and wrong. And again, the focus is on resolution and bringing matters to a conclusion. Once the client has signed that, we will then contact the practice at that point, because at that point we have authority to discuss matters with them, and we will speak to the practice and invite them to then engage in mediation. And it's very important then we're able to discuss with the practice the benefits of mediation, and also the appropriateness of it in these particular circumstances. Mediation by its very nature has to be voluntary. We have to step forward with a willingness to find a resolution and bring a complaint to a conclusion. So we're looking for practices to understand mediation and then step forward with the client to be able to discuss the issues and really look at exploring the root cause, but importantly looking at what practical steps can be taken to bring matters to a conclusion. And that's all done via telephone. There's no direct contact between the practice and the client, because that path has pretty much been exhausted. We're looking at using the independent mediator to get the communication moving in a constructive and sort of forward-stepping process. If a resolution can't be found within the mediation process, then both parties have the same options in terms of any further action. But what we'd be looking to do if a mediation resolution is agreed is put this into a written and full and final agreement, which both parties sign to confirm that this does conclude the complaint, that it is an end, because we're aware for both the stress on practices dealing with complaints and also having an ongoing issue for the client. The purpose has to be to bring this to a conclusion and to move the complaint to something that has happened rather than something that is happening to both parties. I thought it would be helpful today just again to really show mediation in action. And although the process is set out in full on the website, which is vetmediation.co.uk, I thought it would be useful to just look at it in the context of a case study which we dealt with during the course of the mediation trial. And this scenario involved Cat, who's booked in for castration. He, as you would expect, pre-op blood tests were performed during the pre-op assessment, and the test revealed that the cat was mildly anemic. The owner was told that results were normal, there was nothing of concern, and the castration went ahead and was uneventful. Cat was discharged. 8 weeks later, the cat then presented with cold-like symptoms, and during the consultation, the vet explained that this was likely to be due to either a chest infection or possibly a fur blockage due to the coat, and antibiotics were prescribed. Now, in the conversations with the client, it was clear that the client had taken umbrage, I think was the way he phrased it, that as he groomed his cat daily, he certainly didn't feel it could be anything due to the coat, and felt that his comment had been dismissed. And I think when we're looking at complaint mediation, often there are sometimes issues which don't seem particularly significant, but during the interaction, they may well have had an impact or been retained by the client and have an impact going forward. Cat was given antibiotics, unfortunately deteriorated, and returned to the vet a few weeks later. Further blood tests were undertaken, and unfortunately when the test results came back, there was suspected feline infectious peritonitis. The referral was made at that point through to hospital, and at that stage, unfortunately, they were unable to take any further blood tests as the cat's condition deteriorated, and the anemia was severe. Sadly, then the cat was put to sleep after a few days, and the client contacted the practice very shortly after, and complained that he felt the condition should have been diagnosed following that pre-op assessment and the blood test results. Certainly felt that he should have been warned the blood test results were abnormal, and conveyed that he felt they'd lost the opportunity to manage their cat's end-of-life care. And what came through from the discussions was the client definitely had a feeling, a concern, some underlying undercurrent that felt that had the diagnosis been made earlier, he would have had time to accept the outcome, but there was definitely a hint that he felt it could have been different, and this came through during the conversations. And clearly the practice had responded to the complaint and had explained to the client that the test results were within normal limits. There wasn't anything of undue concern at that point. And again, explained to the client that unfortunately the prognosis would have been the same at the point of the castration had a diagnosis been made, as had been the case the 8 weeks later. The complaint went through the internal process at the practice, and unfortunately the practice were unable to allay the client's concerns and his dissatisfaction. So he contacted the VCMS and entered into mediation. We contacted the practice and invited them to participate, and they agreed to do so. They provided copies of the records, copies of the written response to the complaint, and then there was a conversation between the mediator and each party individually to explore their take on the situation, what they felt the triggers were for this particular complaint, and to explore really the feelings and emotions of both parties. The initial mediation did not result in a resolution. And so within the VCMS process, there's the option of referring to a senior resolution manager for a review and any extended mediation. Within that process, we really tried to explore this undercurrent of the client feeling that the outcome could have been different. He could have dealt with the situation, certainly the end of life care, in a different way. And we did obtain a advisory review from one of our vet advisors. We have a panel of advisors who are there to inform the mediator. They don't give an independent opinion, but they're there to inform the questions and to explore the issues with the mediator. And having spoken to the client in particular at length, it was clear that shock was also part of the equation here. The feeling that 8 weeks ago the cat had been under general anaesthetic, been reviewed by the practice, and unfortunately, 8 weeks later, we then have this diagnosis. This was clearly impact as well as guilt, I think was certainly the case, and grief. Through the senior resolution manager's approach, resolution was agreed, and the client was able to accept, I think, from the independent discussions that were had, that he was viewing the situation with hindsight, but that he was able to then certainly accept the explanation of the test results that came through. The practice in turn also agreed to apologise for not explaining the relevance of the pre-op blood test results, in particular the mild anaemia, and they agreed that in future they would review their process and comment and advise clients where there were slight abnormalities that perhaps should be mentioned. The practice agreed to refund the consultation fee for that pre-op assessment blood-free consultation, which was £38. And what the senior mediation process enabled the client to do was to understand, I think, the need to prove that the outcome would have been different if diagnosis had been made earlier. If he was to continue that thought and that line of argument, he was going to have to show that the outcome could have been different. And what's clear from the diagnosis is that he would not have been able to do that. And I think the understanding of that enabled him then to park that issue and to move forward and agree the explanation the practice had provided. A full and final agreement was written up, which summarised this. Both parties signed the agreement, it's exchanged, so they both have a copy. And then importantly, both parties are asked to give feedback on the process and the outcome. And that's incredibly important for us at the VCMS, because we need to ensure that that process is seen as independent, fair, but productive. It needs to be there as a positive tool in resolving complaints, without adjudication, without blame, but in a way that is seen as a positive addition to the process of complaint resolution and concern raising within the veterinary sector. So I hope that gives a useful overview of the service, what we do, and explores in one particular case study the process and the outcome. I'm going to hand you back to Eleanor now to just tie up and look at the impact that the VCMS has had on the RCBS concerns process.
Thanks very much, Jenny. I think it's very interesting to see a sort of case example in action. It's all very well talking about these things in theory, but to see that something has actually gone through and it has had a positive outcome for both. I think one of the things that Jenny didn't mention, but is there as well as a kind of spin-off benefit is that when this is working and it's working well, and particularly if clients are able to resolve issues by being referred back to practices, that can be a client retained rather than a client lost.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that by the time things have gone through an RCBS process and people have got themselves to that level of anxiety on one side, anger and wound upness, if there is such a phrase, on the other side, the chances of retention of a client are very small. But I think having this service where there is the possibility of early interventions, referring back to practices, it makes a big difference.
I think you can definitely have the benefit of either retaining a client, and they can actually then become your most evangelical client at that stage, or being able to conclude the relationship as sort of painlessly and as professionally as possible.
So that's one of the impacts for the practice, if you like, hopefully, which would come through. But as far as the RCVS is concerned, you've heard being sort of bandied around this triage stage and us signposting cases. And I think Jenny mentioned the figures of about 44%, I think, of cases during the trial were referred by the RCVS giving out details. What's happening here is, and this is not a result, this was very much a change made complementary to the process and very much parallel to it happening in the introduction of the trial. Instead of the members of the public being able to simply go onto the website, download a form, and then we are left in the position of having to deal with it under the statutory processes, we have taken that form off the website, and to allow a concern to come into the RCVS, there has to be effectively this triage stage. And what that means in practice is that the inquirer will most likely be telephoning the RCVS and speaking directly to one of our case managers. They can then get some idea of what's going on and whether or not it is one that is and should be for the RCVS, or whether there's a more appropriate route via the VCMS or otherwise for it to be dealt with. So this signposting is very helpful, impacting on everybody concerned in the process. I think that it allows the RCVS, if I'm talking selfishly from our point of view, to have better engagement with the public. In the past, when people have been phoning us up and asking about concerns, there's nothing more dispiriting than somebody on the other line saying, on the end of the phone saying, well, it's not really for us. And then we are absolutely at a blank as to what the alternative would be, because we've mentioned before about court processes really being not an option in most or the vast majority of veterinary situations. So this allows a much more positive dialogue from the RCVS in terms of its relationship with the public. But I think more importantly than that, what it does is get people to the right place. Now, when I opened and we were looking in the early slides about some of the reasons for why we introduced ADR in the first place, it was all to do with potential consumer dissatisfaction. So all of this signposting to the right place with the sorts of outcomes that Jenny's been describing, give the consumer a true alternative, because if it comes to an RCVS concern, it might be in terms of a complaint that was at stage 1 or even one at stage 2 that advice would be given. We all know that veterinary professionals take advice from their regulator very seriously, but when you write in a letter to a member of the public to say that the professional has been given advice, frankly, it sounds rather weak. It sounds as though it's kind of take it or leave it. We all know that's not the case, but I think from a kind of perception from the outside, it's less than perfect. And in practical terms, it doesn't actually offer very much at all, other than that important situation, which I agree is very much uppermost also in the terms of the VCMS, of making sure that it's not going to happen to somebody else, which I think is a very common feature that comes through. But looking then at the impact on the veterinary professionals, and that could be either veterinary nurses or veterinary surgeons, I think a lot of you will be aware through the Mind Matters work that we've been doing and all the ongoing work into blame culture and all the rest of it. We are very aware of the impact of what we at the college do, and particularly how concerns impact on individuals. So if we are able to have a greater number of cases going to the right place, it will mean less stress for the veterinary professional and hopefully a better resolution all round. So what does that mean in practice? I think I talked a bit about the 1,000 or so concerns that we were getting in every year. So does it look any different now? Well, 1,000 concerns a year is the low 80s on a monthly basis. We were regularly getting into the high 90s, but around those sorts of figures. What we're talking about now is concerns much more close to the low 50s. So quite a difference. And that means that there are a number of people who in the past might have been in our concerns process, but they will now go to an alternative process via the VCMS, where I think from a veterinary professional's point of view, there perhaps is a feeling of, well, it's a process we have to go through, it's something we have to do, but at least we're not worried about the regulator and the implications that that could have, or at least the fear of it, because what I would say is most of the time it's the fear of what's going to happen rather than the reality. But if we can get this better signposted as is happening, then I think that's very positive. The other thing is that with the high volume of concerns that we were getting previously, I think it's no secret to say that we were taking longer to get cases processed. It was putting a strain on our resources here, and we indeed put in extra resources. But where we are now averaging in the last 5 months or so is between 85 and 90% of cases at stage 1 will be concluded within 4 months. So I think that again means that if a matter does come to the RCVS, remains with the RCVS, and we're still looking at the sort of 80% or so of cases are likely to fall by the wayside at that point of view, then it's a faster resolution, and a speedier resolution is of assistance because it can minimise the anxiety and fear factor for professionals out there. There is a price that we pay for all of this, because although it sounds very nice, we're getting less cases. It's not that we are now twiddling our thumbs and looking for things to do. Far from it, because actually what we are getting is an extremely high volume of inquiries. And so much so that we have now we have a rota system in place whereby case managers will be taking a day each when they do nothing but answer inquiries. So that this is a very, very high volume of inquiries. It's well into the thousands on an annual basis. So we're monitoring that to make sure that we can meet that demand and continue to be able to signpost things through. So I think we can just have a little bit of a look at the key results. These are the figures that were taken from the trial which ended in August. So the 870 are the inquiries referred to the VCMS. The 297 are the ones referred back to practices. And this was what Jenny was talking to you about when she was talking about the managing the expectations, making sure clients are being a bit more realistic about the sorts of things, and generally sending people back to the practices to get a resolution. So Jenny mentioned that very few come back, and I think it's really worth pointing out very few means 5. Which I think we'll all agree is very, very small number. So if you've got the best part of 300 people being referred back to practices and only 5, in other words, these are people who have been motivated in the first place to contact the VCMS. So they have enough feeling on their side to think about formal complaints. They've been introduced to the process. You would think that perhaps if they weren't getting a resolution, they would be first in the queue coming back. But the reality is, in the trial, out of that 297, we had 5 actually returning again. We also had, I mentioned at the beginning, one of the reasons why the ADR scheme kind of the initial trial rather with the Ombudsman Service was less well received in the overall view of the RCBS was lack of participation. And when that scheme was running, 66% of practices chose not to participate. It's rather, I don't know whether it's one of these rather weird coincidences of life. We've got the figure 66 coming through again, except that this is 66 practices only choosing not to participate. What we found here was that actually the reasons why practices chose not to participate were very similar to the ones that they were talking about at the time of the earlier trial. And quite a few of them related to cases that had already gone through the RCVS process. So I think over time, we would anticipate that figure would drop away because what we've got now is a better signposting and a better way of complainants getting to the right place in the first instance. But obviously it's a figure we're going to keep under review. Another figure which I've just picked out there is that we tend to think a lot and focus a lot in the past in terms of practices not choosing to participate. But I think it's quite interesting that actually of owners who had chosen to get into the mediation, the whole contacting the service, looking for possible resolutions, having done that, 93 decided not to carry on any further. And that can be for a variety of reasons. A very, very small percentage will find themselves in the situation where they feel desperately keen that it has to be considered by the RCVS, and only the RCVS disciplinary sanctions are what they are envisaging. I think quite a few of them have, notwithstanding any discussions from the VCMS and the team there, very unrealistic expectations of what might be achieved. But I think also there's a number, and this comes through from the very high volume of complainants that come directly through to us in our inquiries but don't actually translate into action either to us or to the VCMS, is that people get it out their system.
They have that opportunity to vent, I think, and to share, to be acknowledged and heard, and that's sufficient.
And so that's one of the sort of slightly perhaps unusual statistics, if you like, that's coming through from it. And of all of the inquiries that came through, 165 cases went to mediation. 129 were successfully concluded, which is excellent. Only 36 a line had to be drawn and there was no conclusion. But I think notwithstanding that, I think it was one of these situations where people felt, from a consumer point of view, that they had been listened to, they had had their grievances aired. But the point of mediation is that it has to be a decision for a mutual settlement. So I think it's very interesting that at the end of the day, it has to be both parties agreeing that this is how they want to see things resolved. And if it's just not possible, it's not going to happen, and that's what's coming through. But we're also very pleased to see that in the vast majority of cases that went to mediation, it was very positive. So I think that that's virtually all we have to say. I'm not sure. I'm hoping that we've left enough time for some questions if anybody has them. I think, as Anthony said at the beginning, if we can't take specific questions on specific cases, but if people have things that they want to email in, we've got up on your screen now the website and contact email for the VCMS, and also we've got the further information site for the RCVS, and the RCBS website has full details there. So we will be delighted to hear from anybody.
And we're at the VCMS certainly very keen to speak to practices that might have any queries about mediation, what that looks like, what the process involves, or just to understand the nitty-gritty of it, really, that the contact number's there, the email address is there, and really at any point, or even if it's to talk through a particular scenario, please feel free to get in touch and ask any questions you may have, because we very much see ourselves, as I say, as part of a sort of collaborative approach to this, working together with practices and clients to be as effective as possible. So feel free to get in touch at any point.
Oh, thank you so much. That was really interesting, and it's good to see that difficult cases, the percentage that are being resolved. So well done, Eleanor and Jenny, for getting it moving in the right direction.
Thank you. I think given the emotional nature of
exactly
client complaints, a sort of 80% resolution and that's largely testament to the practices stepping forward and trying to find a way forward with this.
Of course, but as you say, it's a very emotive and emotional time, and people are going through all the guilt feelings and anger. So to get an 80% resolution, I think it bodes well for the scheme.
Thank you.
We've had a couple of questions, and I think I didn't mention, but I know Eleanor's just said then, obviously anything really specific, probably don't put it out as a question here, but send it over directly to, is that the best email?
Yes,
inquiries at vetmediation.co.uk?
Yeah, that's it. And then we can pick up. I can respond to any specific questions on particular complaints individually.
And there is a telephone there, but we'll keep those emails up so that you can copy those down if you want to. So we have an anonymous attendee saying, hi, so is it the case that an aggrieved animal owner cannot go straight to the RCVS webpage to fill out a complaint form, but must now telephone a case manager who might listen to their version and direct them straight to VCMS without the RCVS taking it any further?
Yes, that's absolutely right. In the past, we used to have a complaint form or concerns form on the website that people simply took away, filled in, printed off and sent in to us. And we've changed the process to the extent that that form is no longer directly on the website. And what they do then is they phone up the case managers, and it's what I described in terms of the rota that is there, that allows them then to have a discussion, and the case managers will consider at that stage. And I agree that it's limited information and they will err on the side of caution, but it means that they are able to signpost over, and you saw it from the figures that the number of concerns and the percentage of ones reaching the VCMS that are actually coming via the RCBS. And also the other bit I think that Jenny pointed out and highlighted from the slides was the fact that there are a number of people now landing on the RCVS website page, looking at the information there and then saying, yeah, I think it's probably better that I speak to the VCMS. So that's basically how it works, yes.
And I think you were saying, if I understood properly, that, the number of complaints that you're getting, as in, disgraceful professional conduct, has fallen quite considerably since you brought the scheme in, because people are obviously looking at it saying, it isn't obviously that, I'll go to VCMS. Was that right?
Yes. What we're seeing in the change is that the fact that I think it's the proof of the pudding is in the eating and in the figures, in a sense, in that previously we were getting about the low 80s number of concerns per month. It's more like low 50s on average now. So I think that is quite a difference. I mean, there is huge variation in that. I think in one month we had low 30s, another month we've had high 60s. It varies around, but on average we're looking at a lesser number of concerns being dealt with, which I think is appropriate, because we're able to signpost where it can be more appropriately dealt with. And
I think that's great, because thank God I never got a letter from your good selves, but getting that letter through the door which says somebody has said this, that is, a scary moment for any vet or vet nurse, isn't it? So if that's being reduced, that has to be a positive thing as well.
Yes, I think it is positive. I think in the past we've talked a lot about the fear factor of the RCVS, and we tried to do as much as we could to ameliorate that. But having said that, the very fact that something lands with your regulator, we can understand how worried people get. And the fact now that we're able to signpost things in the other direction, I think is very positive. The other factor also is for those that are remaining within the RCVS, we're still looking at the vast majority of them actually don't go beyond the stage 1 process, and the faster that can be, the better it is again, and that's feeding into the recognition of the stress that might be there for the individuals concerned.
And because you've got the lower numbers now, you're getting to them a lot quicker than when there was 80, 90 a month. If there's only 30, 40, you can manage that much easier.
Yes, I said 30 is certainly exceptionally low.
Yeah,
I wouldn't foresee that. I mean, we're averaging out about the low 50s at the moment.
Yeah, great. That's great, Eleanor. Follow-on question from the first question: what qualifications do the case managers have at the VCMS?
They're trained mediators. We have the panel of vet advisors there to inform on any clinical aspects, but as mediators, they're trained really to look at the dispute, the conflict aspects of the complaint and the reasons why it's continuing to remain unresolved. But there is a need to obviously bring in understanding of the profession and day-to-day life in practice, which they're able to pull through. But their skills are really in diffusing the emotion and looking for a sort of a pathway through to find a resolution.
Thank you, Jenny. We've got Anne saying, how much does this service cost and who pays for it?
It's free at the point of delivery because it's funded by the RCVS, but for either a client bringing a complaint to us or for a practice utilising us, there's no charge at that point.
That's great. Okay, thank you. Maureen has asked, what info about cases from VCMS is then fed back to the Royal College, if any, i.e. do the Royal College keep a log of complaints handled through VCMS against individuals' practices? And then as a supplementary to that, she said, if the Royal College now takes on a case, instead of sending it to VCMS, does that mean they consider it maybe a case of serious misconduct?
Dealing with the first question first, do we keep a log of all the cases that have gone through the VCMS? The answer is no, we don't. We have, as part of our agreement, the ability to audit on a random basis a certain percentage of cases, but that is to ensure that we are carrying out our statutory duty and we're not missing anything, so that we're not missing cases that should be with us on a misconduct basis. So no, we don't have a log on a case-by-case basis. I think there is provision in the rules in terms of if there were frequent concerns coming into one premises, then that could be passed on, but that is the only situation that can arise. And if anyone wants more information, they can check it out and we can find the necessary bit of information and send it on to them. In terms of the second question, and I'm just now taking a bit of a blind spot as to the terms, I think it was can you remind me, Anthony?
If RCBS now take on a case instead of sending it to VCMS, does that mean they consider it maybe a case of serious misconduct?
It could do. It could mean what we're looking at is the threshold for arguable case. And arguable case means effectively, bearing in mind we're only getting one side of the story at that point. If everything that person says is true, could it be? Now, what our case managers are finding at this stage is a number of the cases that they are taking on, it's simply impossible to get the level of information required in terms of that initial inquiry. So what I wouldn't like anyone to go away thinking is that just because it's accepted by the RCBS into the RCVS process, it somehow means that it has immediately acquired a level of seriousness that's going to get everybody off to a disciplinary hearing. Far from it. We're still getting the high percentage of cases closing at stage 1. An awful lot of cases at that very early stage, we have very limited information information available. And it may be very complex, and we simply have to do quite a bit of investigation to find out the information. So it may hit that very low threshold of arguable case, but there's no suggestion at all that it's going any higher than that.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Eleanor. I think that is all the questions. I would just signpost to people, if you're not aware, we do on our virtual Congress in January a Mind Matters Symposium. If you go to the internationalwebinarvet.com, you'll see the Royal College Symposium, which this year is all about finding your purpose and passion. So if any of you haven't signed up for that, you're very welcome. That's available to anybody connected within the veterinary profession, be they nurses, practice managers working in pharmaceutical firms. So there's no charge for that, but obviously already seems to be very popular. Just another example of the great work I think the Royal College are doing. I know, Eleanor, speaking to Lizzie, you know, as a regulator, you've got to do certain things, and that can mean sometimes that, you know, we in the front line can sometimes think a bit negatively of you, but it's so positive to see you doing stuff like the Mind Matters, like this, in a way to try and make life, you know, easier for vets as well. And, you know, just wanted to thank you for that.
No, thank you. I think it's one of these things where we are a regulator, but the RCVS is much more than a regulator. And hopefully if that message is coming across, then we're delighted.
Great. Thank you so much, Eleanor. And thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Anthony.
Looking forward to seeing you on another webinar very soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.